B. Collins.
Peter B. Collins, news and comment. It's Monday, May 21st, 2018. We start off with a quick programming note. Your humble host is going to take another break. A road trip to Southern California is on my horizon. Our next podcast will be on Tuesday, May 29th. I hope the union will survive during my absence. Well, this is a curious story that I wrestled with on Friday. The so-called informant, reporting to the FBI, who had contact with Carter Page and George Papadopoulos, starting in July of 2016. As Glenn Greenwald points out in a great piece at The Intercept published on Saturday, we now know the name of this individual, Stefan Halper, and his background is fascinating. We'll get to it in a second. Stefan Halper provided information to the FBI that Donald Trump characterizes as a spy in his campaign. That may not be accurate. But Halper, who has a deep history at the CIA, as an ally of George H.W. Bush, as a guy part of the dirty Reagan campaign in 1980 that gave us the October surprise campaign, the release of the hostages that occurred while Reagan was taking the oath of office the following January. So this was an interesting choice. Or maybe he just happened to run into Carter Page and he volunteered it to his handlers at the FBI. There's a lot we still don't know. But as Greenwald points out, what is most curious about this is the way the leading promoters of the Russiagate narrative, the New York Times and the Washington Post, have steadfastly refused to specifically identify Stefan Halper, while at the same time providing enough details about the guy for other reporters to deduce and reveal his identity. And as of today, I can't read every page of the New York Times every day, but I have found no reference to the actual identity of Stefan Halper, even as the Times covers the rants of Donald Trump that we'll get to in a moment, demanding an investigation into his claims that he was spied upon by Obama's FBI. So this is where I really value Glenn Greenwald. He wrote a lengthy piece that prints out at 21 pages. He describes how Halper in 1980, under the direction of former CIA boss and then vice presidential candidate Poppy Bush, got caught running a spying operation from inside the Carter administration. The plot involved CIA operatives passing classified information about Carter's foreign policy to Reagan campaign officials in order to ensure the Reagan campaign didn't get surprised in October. And when this has surfaced, as I pointed out on Friday, we had the president asserting that this individual existed, we had denials, and then we had the details of that he's teaching in England and, different descriptors of his background. And we were told that if his identity were released, it could hamper ongoing investigations and sensitive sources and methods. And that is the bullshit smokescreen that is so often used by the FBI and the spooks to pat us on the head and tell us it's secret, you don't want to know, and you're not allowed to know. And even Mark Warner, the top Democrat on the Senate Intelligence Committee, who was busy last week engineering the confirmation of the known torturer Gina Haspel to run the CIA, he warned his colleagues not to reveal the identity of this FBI guy because it could be a crime. Well, I encourage you to read Greenwald's piece and get the history on Stefan Halper. There are even payroll records that Greenwald dug up that show in the last few years this guy Halper has been receiving six-figure payments from the Pentagon. We don't know about other agencies like the FBI that might have paid him as well. And so the game that the Times and the Post have been playing, I have to figure or deduce that this is aimed at keeping their contacts happy, the ones who leak so prodigiously and provide the documents that are shown or read over the phone to a newspaper reporter but are still not available to the public, that fuel this whole Trump-Russia narrative. And when you see corporate media doing the bidding of the intelligence community in a case like this, it's about maintaining access and keeping those warm and fuzzy pipelines chock full of leaks. And so I await the detailed timeline that will show us when the first contacts were made by Stefan Halper with Papadopoulos and Carter Page. We know that Carter Page had a history of FBI contact going back to a trip he made to Russia in 2013. But we don't have the explicit timeline of the summer of 2016 of exactly when these events took place, when the Australian ambassador met with Carter Page and got him loaded in London at a wine bar. We need to see all of this laid out because it could be that Trump's paranoia has some basis in fact, that the investigation was fueled by paid operatives of the FBI. The FISA court could have been misled. It's been lied to by many agencies on many occasions leading up to the contentious election period of 2016. And when you see Trump getting all worked up and all pissed off, our dear tweeter demanded on Sunday that the Justice Department investigate whether the FBI or Justice infiltrated or surveilled his campaign at the behest of the Obama administration. And by ordering this investigation, which, by the way, the Justice Department leapt to put into action, Rod Rosenstein, who has rebuffed some of the president's crazy demands in the past, took this one seriously and ordered the Inspector General of the Justice Department to add it to his little old bucket list. Now, Trump's drama in this case, I hereby demand and will do so officially tomorrow that the Department of Justice look into whether or not the FBI, DOJ infiltrated or surveilled the Trump campaign for political purposes. And this is overstepping a line that Trump acknowledged a few weeks ago he knows about, that the president shouldn't be meddling in the details of the operation of the Justice Department. And it was a few weeks ago he said, at some point I will have no choice but to use the powers granted to the presidency and get involved. Well, apparently he felt he reached that point on Sunday when he started his Twitter blasts. Now, one critic, Stephen Vladek, professor of law, University of Texas, said this is little more than a transparent effort to undermine an ongoing investigation. But we have to acknowledge, or at least I do, that there is some basis for Trump's concern. And that the FBI and the CIA may have found ways to use their powers to try to slow down or impede the Trump campaign, or to try to produce evidence to undermine it. Of course, they didn't expect Trump to be named the winner, and this has made the whole thing more convoluted. So as we see this taking shape, I'm sure there are a lot of people who just cling to their partisan position, that Trump's a bad guy, that James Comey, that James Clapper, that John Brennan, these are all American heroes fighting to bring you the truth for the first time in their professional lives. And so it remains to be seen where all this goes and how it plays out Front pager on Sunday's New York Times reveals a new angle, and this appears to be leaks from the Mueller investigation or people close to it. And we're told there aren't any leaks from Mueller, right? The headline reads, Trump inquiry grows to include contacts in Gulf. And that's not G-O-L-F, that's G-U-L-F. And what they describe is a meeting that took place August 3rd of 2016, organized by Donnie Trump Jr., at the table, Eric Prince, the Blackwater founder, Betsy DeVos's brother. With them, George Nader, who has contacts in the UAE, the United Arab Emirates, and in Saudi Arabia, and who has become an influential player in the Trump administration behind the scenes. He's able to buy influence as needed. There was also a representative of Saudi Arabia, and Joel Zamel, who is described as the leader of an Israeli, he's a former intelligence officer in Israel, and his company specializes in collecting information, shaping opinion through social media. So the thrust of this meeting is all of these people, Israel, Saudi, the Emirates, are looking for ways that they can help get Trump elected. And what's fascinating about this New York Times story, which is pretty lengthy, is that they continually downplay the role of Joel Zamel, and they act like he's just a businessman who happens to be Israeli. Now, the meetings, which have not been previously reported, are the first indication that countries other than Russia may have offered assistance to the Trump campaign. But whatever proposals surfaced were not immediately executed. There is a payment reported to Zamel by Nader of $2 million, but it happened after the election. And so that may have been gearing up for corruption, but the Times wants us to believe it had to do with rigging the election for Trump. And while they highlight the role of Saudis and Emiratis, they downplay the role of Israel. The bottom line is it doesn't appear that this led to anything like so many meetings of the Trump campaign. But that doesn't stop people from speculating heavily about it. So today was the day Trump got to appear at the swearing-in of Gina Haspel, the torturess who is now going to run the Central Intelligence Agency. But before he did, the dear tweeter was on the box, hammering John Brennan, who was Obama's CIA director. And he suggested that Brennan was to blame for the investigation by Special Counsel Mueller into Russian election interference and links between the Trump campaign and Moscow. And this is a case where I think Trump may be onto something. I've speculated here that I think Brennan and Clapper, and I've added one more name, Dan Jones. He was the Intelligence Committee staffer who directed Feinstein's investigation of CIA torture. And after the 2016 campaign, he became the operator of an independent shop, kind of like Fusion GPS, a research company, that raised $50 million, he reported, to continue the Christopher Steele investigation into Trump and Russia. Now, Trump may have better sources than I do. But when you put this together, I see emerging here advantage Trump in the Trump-Russia imbroglio. We'll see where it goes, but that's how I'm sizing it up today. So after Gina Haspel was sworn in, Mike Pompeo was there. He is the most recent CIA director, shuffled over to become Secretary of State, and they shipped him over to one of those think tanks in Washington. Was it? Oh, the Heritage Foundation, where he delivered a speech which I will describe as the first rhetorical volley in the new war against Iran. And we've seen this before in the Bush administration. They ginned up the invasion of Iraq, in less than 15 months while they were in office. Trump's trying to catch up here. And the message from Mike Pompeo is to demonize the Iranians, to exaggerate the claims against them, and to build a case, to demand concessions, or the U.S. will attack militarily. Now, not all that was explicitly stated, but Pompeo said that, let me get the quote here, he demands that Iran admit to the military purpose of its now moribund nuclear weapons program, end its support for Hezbollah, Hamas, and the Houthis in Yemen, and withdraw all its forces from Syria. Now, none of these demands have anything to do with Trump's withdrawal from the seven-nation nuclear agreement. These are a wish list from Israel. Now, the claim that they directly support the Houthi rebels in Yemen is unproven. Their support for Hezbollah, Hamas, their involvement in Syria. It is so hypocritical for the United States to issue these demands as we operate our covert activities in Syria. We're not covert in Yemen. We're openly supporting the Saudi assault on that country. And what Pompeo believes is that the U.S. is staking out this strong position and that other nations will follow us into sanctions against Iran, and they hope the march to war. And I believe that the opposite is occurring, where this risky gambit is further isolating the United States and creating or enhancing the perception that we are the rogue nation to be feared. And the National Iranian American Council issued a blistering statement about Pompeo's remarks. Quote, the Trump administration is setting the stage for a war of choice with Iran. Mike Pompeo offered a smokescreen of diplomacy to distract from the administration's pursuit of Iraq-style regime change. Trump is renting out U.S. Middle East policy to the highest bidder, in this case, Saudi Arabia, the Gulf Cooperation Council states, and Israel, and expecting ordinary Americans and U.S. service members to shoulder the burden of a regional escalation, a potential trade war with our allies, and a new Iraq-style regime change war in the Middle East. The statement continues, Pompeo and Trump are attempting to co-opt the legitimate concerns of ordinary Iranians in order to advance the undemocratic and illiberal interests of Mohammed bin Salman, the Saudi crown prince, and Benjamin Netanyahu. Trump, bin Salman, and Netanyahu are dealing a devastating blow to the Iranian people's efforts for a representative government that respects human rights and the rule of law. Singularly obsessed with unraveling the accomplishments of his successor, they meant his predecessor, and now surrounded by a cohort of advisors who've been planning for war with Iran for years, Trump's push for war with Iran is his most reckless policy for America to date. Every day I pause for a second and thank the people who support my work here at the Peter B. Collins Podcast with your subscriptions. Great people like Brian Mazzy, Benny Alto, Aidan McAleer, and Auntie Lundberg. I appreciate your support. I need more people to appreciate. So come on over to peterbcollins.com. Click on my menu tab, pull it down, then click on Become a Subscriber. You land on the sign-up page where you can easily choose $5, $10, $20 a month, our $50 annual subscription. And if you're allergic to PayPal, don't let that be an obstacle. You can just use the U.S. mail. And my address is Box 150, 660, San Rafael, California, 94915. That's Box 150, 660, San Rafael, and the zipper 94915. On Sunday, there was an election in Venezuela, and Nicolas Maduro has been declared the winner. It earns him another 6-year term. And the biased reporting of the New York Times is evident in its headline. Venezuela election won by Maduro amid widespread disillusionment. Now, there is distress and disillusionment in Venezuela. It comes primarily after years of low worldwide oil prices that depressed their foreign exchange and their economy in significant ways. And the U.S. moved to capitalize on that distress, through the same old tactics that Naomi Klein outlined in her book, Shock Doctrine. And while I can't defend everything that Nicolas Maduro has done, and it does appear that he elbowed some of his opponents out of the race, the low turnout was driven by boycotts that were launched by the other political parties in Venezuela. And this is written up by the New York Times like this. Electoral officials declared Maduro the victor Sunday night in a contest that critics said was heavily rigged in his favor. Turnout was extremely low, with more than half of voters not casting ballots, reflecting both a call from many opposition leaders for a boycott of the vote and the disillusionment of longtime government supporters. I think the bias is extremely clear there. Here's another biased headline from the New York Times. What was gained in Gaza protests? Zero. Less than zero. They found an unhappy Palestinian in Gaza and quoted him, made that the headline. But are you telling me that the deaths of more than 100 protesters, virtually all of whom were nonviolent and unarmed, the wounding of thousands of Palestinians in this grisly exchange, that it meant nothing? I firmly disagree. And over at the Huffington Post, an article by a man named M.J. Rosenberg. I don't know him. He's described as a former Capitol Hill staffer. And he explains that he's personally opposed to the efforts to impose boycott, divestment, and sanctions on the State of Israel. But Mr. Rosenberg has the equitable approach. He respects the First Amendment. And he singles out Democrats, including Senator Ben Cardin of Maryland and Senate Democratic leader Chuck Schumer, who are co-sponsoring a bill that would make support for BDS a felony, with a civil penalty of up to $250,000, a maximum criminal penalty of $1 million, and 20 years in prison. This is a deep violation of my First Amendment rights. And to see this take place under Trump, driven by Democrats, shows how much our government is captive to the Israel lobby and its agency AIPAC. This is insidious. It is flatly unconstitutional. But that doesn't stop people like Schumer and Cardin from promoting this. And Rosenberg writes, yes, lots of people, including me, oppose boycotting Israel. But how is it even possible to criminalize simply supporting a boycott to protest the occupation? Recently, the state of North Carolina was faced with a boycott to protest its policy against allowing transgender people to use public bathrooms. How can it be legal to refuse to do business with North Carolina, but illegal to refuse to do business with Israel? And he qualifies, he does support refusing to do business with Israeli settlements. And so we really need Democrats, progressives, and non-aligned people to fight back. Make sure your senator doesn't support this. We've got to call it out for what it is. An insidious violation of our constitutional rights to protect not Jews, but the state of Israel and its extreme Zionist government from criticism and from political action. So Trump, who's been fantasizing about a Nobel Prize in advance of his scheduled June 12th summit with Kim Jong-un in Singapore, he apparently is really rattled by the moves that Kim Jong-un made last week. And as I said, Kim is skilled as a bluffer and a bully. And maybe Trump has met his match, somebody who can keep him flat-footed or off balance. So over the weekend, the New York Times describes Trump as increasingly concerned that his summit meeting could turn into a political embarrassment. Since when does Trump worry about being embarrassed? He is a living, walking, talking embarrassment. Trump was surprised and angered by the statement issued Wednesday by the North's chief nuclear negotiator. On Thursday and Friday, Trump peppered aides with questions about the wisdom of proceeding. On Saturday night, he called President Moon Jae-in of South Korea to ask about the North's public statement, because he couldn't wait until Tuesday when Moon will be showing up at the White House. I would describe that as frantic on Trump's part. And so it appears that Trump's having second thoughts about this, and one of the real concerns by many people is what kind of grasp Trump has on the details of the North Korean program. Moon of South Korea and his aides report that Kim seems highly conversant with all elements of his program. But unnamed aides, quoted by or mentioned here in this article, and I surmise that it's H.R. McMaster or Rex Tillerson. It says, aides who've recently left the administration say Trump has resisted the kind of detailed briefings about enrichment capabilities, plutonium reprocessing, nuclear weapons production, and missile programs that previous presidents regularly sat through. Meanwhile, it's very confusing, the status of the trade war with China. Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin says that we are delaying any imposition of tariffs, that a broad agreement has been struck, that China is going to buy more U.S. goods and farm products to reduce our trade deficit. But the New York Times describes it this way: China's propaganda machine took a victory lap after the talks, proclaiming that a strong challenge from the U.S. had been turned aside, at least for now. And Trump claims that he's got a really good deal and that everything's going to be great. But the truth appears more elusive. The U.S. does not have a clear position on the Chinese telecom company ZTE. They make smartphones. Just a week ago, Trump was trying to save 75,000 jobs at ZTE by softening sanctions that the U.S. had imposed on that company. And now we're told, well, maybe those will continue or maybe they won't. So I'd say it's a confusing picture, and the stock market responded by cheering on what appears to be a stall in the trade war with China. I have a troubling report to share with you today. Jesslyn Radak is a Washington, D.C. attorney who has represented some of the leading whistleblowers in recent years. She was on the Snowden legal team, the Manning legal team, Tom Drake, the NSA whistleblower. And Jesslyn Radak is herself now being accused of promoting false allegations of rape and sexual assault against Trevor Fitzgibbon. He is the discredited leader of a Washington, D.C. PR firm that was shut down after his Me Too moments were exposed. But it appears that Radak was having a consensual affair with Trevor Fitzgibbon. And information and evidence released by Fitzgibbon's lawyers in a suit that has been brought in the District of Columbia against Jess Radak include text messages where she seemed very happy with the consensual sex that they had had. But after Fitzgibbon was discredited, she accused him of first-degree sexual abuse and third-degree sexual abuse. And she claimed that on December 8th of 2015, that Fitzgibbon used force, penetrating her vagina with his penis, grabbing her by the waist, pulling her onto his lap, touching her breast. Now, there's some problems here because Fitzgibbon has come up with an alibi, placing him not in Washington, D.C. on that date, but in Austin, Texas. And it is accused that Radak has deleted some text messages that might corroborate that information. And I find this very, very disappointing. I have a lot of respect for the work that Jesselyn Radack has done. And I do consider her innocent until proven guilty. I have no interest in her extramarital sexual adventures. But if she worked to frame this fellow Fitzgibbon, and she converted a consensual sexual affair into rape, well, that's a serious problem. Very serious. The Supreme Court today, with the help of Neil Gorsuch, cemented its posture as pro-corporate, anti-worker in a 5-4 vote. They ruled that companies can use arbitration clauses in employment contracts to prevent workers from banding together to form class actions and sue over workplace issues. Ruth Bader Ginsburg wrote a spirited dissent, but the die is cast and corporate power once again prevails. The convicted coal baron from West Virginia, Don Blankenship, has said that he is going to try to run as a third-party candidate, and if he does, that would secure a victory for Joe Manchin, who is barely a Democrat and is running for his second term from West Virginia. Now, there is a sore loser law in West Virginia that is supposed to prevent somebody from switching parties after losing a primary. We'll see if that holds. And finally today, it's amazing what a Nick Kristof expose in the New York Times can do. He's a brilliant columnist who often takes up the plight of people whose human rights have been violated. And over the weekend, he ran a lengthy piece in the Sunday Times about California's death row inmate Kevin Cooper, who sits less than a mile from me at San Quentin State Prison. He has always insisted that he's innocent, his appeals are exhausted, and he has asked Governor Brown for a reprieve so that a modern-day DNA test of critical evidence can be conducted. Brown is mulling that request, but what's fascinating is that our junior Senator Kamala Harris was the Attorney General of California before she got elected to the Senate. As Attorney General, she rejected requests from Kevin Cooper's legal team for new DNA testing. But hey, Kamala Harris has dreams of running for president. And she issued a statement on Friday. As a firm believer in DNA testing, I hope the governor and the state will allow for such testing in the case of Kevin Cooper, not mentioning her prior opposition. Hey, that's politics. Thanks for listening to my daily news and comment podcast. I'll be back at you a week from tomorrow, Tuesday, May 29th. I'm Peter B. Collins.
Happy trails to you until we meet again. Happy trails.